Hungry Bear approached picnic. Baby. What Grandma filmed became the internet's most controversial clip. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The golden rays of sunlight filtered through the tall oak trees, casting dancing shadows across the checkered blanket, where little Noah played with his favorite rattle. At just 10 months old, his innocent laughter echoed through the peaceful clearing at Pinewood National Park, bringing smiles to everyone at the family gathering. It was supposed to be a perfect day, a reunion picnic to celebrate Grandma Rose's 75th birthday. "Look at him go," whispered Olivia, Noah's mother, as she arranged sandwiches on paper plates. "He's going to be walking before we know it." Grandma Rose nodded, her weathered hands gripping her new smartphone. Her daughter had taught her how to record videos last week, and she was determined to capture every precious moment of her youngest grandchild. "These will be memories to treasure," she said, pressing the red button on the screen and panning slowly across the scene. Daniel, Noah's father, was busy unpacking the last of their picnic supplies from the car parked 30 yards away. His sister Mia was helping their uncle set up the portable grill near the designated picnic area. Nobody noticed when Noah, fascinated by a butterfly with vibrant blue wings, began crawling toward the edge of the blanket where a shiny red apple had rolled onto the grass. "He's such a curious little thing," Rose commented, keeping her camera steady as she followed Noah's movements. The afternoon sun caught his wispy blonde hair, creating a halo effect that made Rose's heart swell with love. What happened next would be replayed millions of times around the world. A rustling sound came from the dense line of trees bordering their picnic spot. At first, Rose thought it might be the breeze or perhaps a small animal. She kept filming, capturing Noah's determined crawl toward the apple. The rustling grew louder, drawing Rose's attention to the forest edge. Her breath caught in her throat. Emerging from between two towering pines was a brown bear, its fur matted and its frame leaner than it should have been in early summer. The bear's dark eyes scanned the picnic area, its nose lifted high, sniffing the tantalizing sense of food. Rose's finger trembled over the screen, but she didn't stop recording. She couldn't. It was as if time had slowed down, and she was frozen in place, watching a scene unfold that didn't seem real. "Daniel," she tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely a whisper. Her son-in-law was too far away to hear, his back turned as he rummaged through the cooler. The bear took another cautious step forward, emerging fully from the tree line. It was a young adult, not fully grown but still massive compared to little Noah, who remained oblivious to the danger. The apple that had caught Noah's attention now lay directly between the baby and the approaching bear. Noah reached the edge of the blanket and paused, his tiny hands pressing against the soft grass. He spotted the apple again and let out a delighted squeal that made the bear cock its head. Rose's heart thundered in her chest. She should shout, she should warn the others, she should do something. But her body refused to obey, and her finger kept pressing the record button, capturing every terrifying second. The bear's ears twitched at Noah's sound, and it took another step forward. It was now just 15 feet from the baby. Rose could see its ribs through its fur. This was a hungry animal, likely awakened from hibernation without finding adequate food sources. Its eyes locked onto the picnic spread, but then Noah moved again, drawing its attention. "Olivia," Rose finally managed to whisper more loudly, nudging her daughter who was arranging flowers in a small vase as a centerpiece for their outdoor lunch. Olivia glanced up, following her mother's horrified gaze. The color drained from her face as she spotted the bear. She reached for Noah, but he was just beyond her grasp, and any sudden movement might startle the bear into action. "Don't move," she breathed, her maternal instincts warring with her knowledge of wildlife safety. "Daniel," she called, slightly louder but still controlled, her eyes never leaving her son. Noah, unaware of the tension gripping the adults, continued his determined journey toward the apple. His chubby fingers finally closed around it, and he sat back on the grass, examining his prize with fascination. The bear was now just 10 feet away, its nose working overtime, conflicted between the abundant food on the picnic blanket and this small human holding a fruit that smelled sweet and inviting. Rose's camera captured it all. The bear's hesitant approach, Noah's innocent delight, the mounting terror on Olivia's face, and the moment when Daniel finally turned and saw what was happening. His body went rigid, the picnic supplies forgotten in his hands. Behind him, Mia noticed her brother's sudden stillness and followed his gaze, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. What happened next would spark debates across the internet, divide wildlife experts, and raise questions about parenting, human-animal interactions, and the ethics of filming during moments of danger. But in that moment, as Rose's trembling hands held the phone, none of them could have predicted how this encounter would change their lives forever. Noah, with the simple logic of a baby who had just learned to share, did something unexpected. He held out the apple toward the bear and babbled happily, an offering from one curious soul to another. The bear stopped its advance, confused by this strange behavior from the small human. It sniffed the air more intensely, torn between hunger and caution. Noah continued to hold out the apple, his tiny arm extended in a gesture that seemed impossibly brave for someone who had no concept of danger. And Rose kept filming, torn between terror and something else, a strange sense that she was witnessing something remarkable, something beyond ordinary understanding, something that needed to be preserved no matter what happened next. The bear lowered its massive head, sniffing the air closer to Noah. Its dark eyes studied the small human with what almost seemed like curiosity. The tension in the clearing was unbearable. Daniel had begun to inch forward, his movements slow and deliberate, while Olivia remained frozen, her eyes locked on her baby, calculating whether she could reach him before the bear could. "Noah, sweetie, stay still," Olivia whispered, though she knew her 10-month-old couldn't possibly understand the gravity of the situation. What happened in the next few moments would later be analyzed frame by frame by wildlife experts, psychologists, and internet commentators alike. Noah, growing impatient with the bear's hesitation, did what babies often do. He threw the apple. The fruit sailed through the air in a gentle arc and landed with a soft thud just inches from the bear's front paws. The bear flinched at the sudden movement but didn't retreat. Instead, it lowered its snout to the apple, sniffing it thoroughly before gently taking it between its teeth. The crunch as it bit into the juicy fruit echoed in the suddenly silent clearing. "Don't move," came a new voice. Uncle Pete, who had extensive experience with wildlife from his years as a forest ranger before retirement. He had circled around from the grill area and now stood at the edge of the tree line, assessing the situation with professional calm. "Everyone stay perfectly still. The bear is focused on the food, not the baby." But nature doesn't always follow human expectations. As the bear finished the apple in 2 quick bites, Noah clapped his hands in delight, the sudden noise making the animal look directly at him again. The bear took another step forward, now barely 6 feet from the baby. Rose's hands shook violently, but somehow she kept filming. Later, she would be unable to explain why she didn't drop the phone and rush to Noah's aid. It was like watching a miracle unfold, she would tell reporters. Something told me not to interfere. That something would become the center of a worldwide controversy. The bear moved closer still, extending its nose toward Noah, who remained seated on the grass, unafraid and fascinated by this large, furry visitor. Daniel had managed to close half the distance between himself and his son, but stopped when the bear looked up, suddenly aware of his approach. "Back up, Daniel," Pete whispered urgently. "Slowly. Don't make eye contact with the bear." Daniel hesitated, torn between protecting his son and potentially provoking the bear into aggression. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he took one careful step backward, then another. What no one had noticed was Mia's quiet movement toward the picnic basket. With trembling hands, she pulled out another apple and, defying every wildlife safety protocol, tossed it in a wide arc past Noah and the bear. The fruit landed with a soft thud several yards away, closer to the forest. The bear's head snapped toward the sound, its nose working overtime at the scent of more food. Noah, however, was not ready to end this unexpected encounter. He reached out one chubby hand and, before anyone could react, touched the bear's front paw. Olivia's stifled scream caught in her throat. Daniel froze mid-step. Rose's camera captured the impossible moment. A baby human making physical contact with a wild bear. The bear looked down at the tiny fingers on its paw, and something extraordinary happened. Instead of lashing out or retreating, it remained perfectly still, as if puzzled by this small creature's lack of fear. For 3 heartbeats that felt like an eternity, Noah's hand rested on the bear's fur. Then, with a sudden movement that had everyone gasping, the bear pulled back, turned toward the second apple Mia had thrown, and ambled toward it, seemingly losing interest in the baby. "Now, Daniel," Pete whispered urgently. "Get Noah." Daniel didn't need to be told twice. He lunged forward, scooping his son into his arms in one fluid movement and retreating rapidly to the picnic blanket where Olivia waited, her arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face. The bear, now occupied with the second apple, seemed oblivious to the human's movements. It finished the fruit quickly, then raised its head, scanning the area once more. For a moment, it looked directly at the family huddled together on the blanket, and Rose's camera captured what some would later swear was an almost human-like intelligence in its gaze. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the bear turned and lumbered back toward the forest, pausing only once at the tree line to look back before disappearing into the shadows. The entire encounter had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it would change everything for the Marshall family. Rose finally lowered her phone, her arms aching from holding it steady for so long. Her finger hovered over the stop button, but before she pressed it, she captured one last scene. Noah, safe in his mother's arms, pointing toward the forest and babbling excitedly as if trying to call back his new friend. "Oh my God," Olivia sobbed, clutching Noah to her chest. "Oh my God, oh my God." Daniel collapsed onto the blanket beside them, his legs giving way now that the immediate danger had passed. "Is he okay? Is he hurt?" His hands moved frantically over his son, checking for any sign of injury. "He's fine," Olivia managed between sobs. "He's perfectly fine." Mia approached them, her face ashen. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have thrown that apple without asking Uncle Pete. I just thought you may have saved Noah's life," Pete said quietly, joining the group. His weathered face was solemn as he studied the tree line where the bear had disappeared. "Though I've never seen anything like that in 30 years of wildlife management. That bear should have been more aggressive, especially if it was hungry enough to approach humans." Rose looked down at her phone, at the video she had just recorded. Her finger hovered over the delete button. Should she erase this terrifying moment? But something stopped her. the same instinct that had kept her filming throughout the encounter. "We should report this to the park rangers," Pete continued, his Forster's training taking over. "They need to know there's a bear approaching humans in this area." Daniel nodded numbly, still holding Olivia and Noah in a protective embrace. "Let's pack up and get out of here first. I don't want to spend another minute in this place." As the family hurriedly gathered their belongings, Rose sat motionless, staring at her phone screen. She had captured something incredible, something that defied explanation. A wild bear and a human baby, connecting in a way that shouldn't be possible. She never intended to share the video with anyone beyond family. It was too personal, too frightening. But that evening, as they gathered in Pete's cabin just outside the park boundaries, emotions were still running high. "I still can't believe you just kept filming, Mom," Olivia said, her voice tight with lingering fear and a trace of accusation. Noah was asleep in a portable crib in the corner of the room, peaceful and unaffected by the day's events. What if something had happened to him? Rose flinched at her daughter's words. I don't know why I kept recording. It was like I couldn't move, couldn't do anything but watch." "Let me see it," Pete said, extending his hand for Rose's phone. "The park rangers will want to know exactly what happened." Reluctantly, Rose handed over her phone. The family gathered around as Pete played the video from the beginning. Watching it now, in the safety of the cabin, was surreal. The video captured details none of them had fully processed in the moment. The bear's hesitant body language, Noah's complete lack of fear, the strange pause when the baby touched the bear's paw. "This is remarkable," Pete murmured, rewinding to watch the touch again. "I've never seen anything like it." "Delete it," Olivia said suddenly, her voice firm. "Delete it right now." Rose looked at her daughter in surprise. "But the rangers, we can tell them what happened without showing them. That." Olivia gestured at the screen, where Noah's tiny hand was frozen in midair, reaching for the bear. "If this gets out, people will think we're terrible parents. They'll say we endangered our baby for a video." Daniel put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "Liv, no one's going to think that. It was an accident. We didn't know the bear was there." "But your mother kept filming instead of calling for help," Olivia snapped, then immediately looked contrite. "I'm sorry, Rose. I know you were in shock, but please, delete it." Rose hesitated, her finger hovering over the phone. But before she could press anything, Mia spoke up. "Wait," she said quietly. "I think this video shows something important. Something special." All eyes turned to her. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked. Mia, who had remained mostly quiet since the encounter, leaned forward. "Noah connected with that bear somehow. Did you see how it changed after he touched it? It's like they understood each other on some level we can't comprehend." Olivia shook her head. "That's ridiculous. It was a wild animal, Mia. It could have killed our baby." "But it didn't," Mia insisted. "It chose not to." "Don't you think that's worth understanding?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Rose looked down at her phone again, at the frozen image of her grandson and the bear. Delete it and move on, or preserve this inexplicable moment? The decision was taken out of her hands when Pete's cabin door burst open, and two uniformed park rangers entered, their faces grave. "We got your call about the bear encounter," the taller one said, introducing himself as Ranger Walsh. "Is everyone okay?" Pete nodded, standing to greet his former colleagues. "Everyone's fine. No injuries, just a good scare." "We need to know exactly where this happened," the second ranger said, pulling out a map. "We've had 3 bear sightings in the park this week, but no close encounters until now." As Pete pointed out their picnic location on the map, Ranger Walsh noticed Rose's phone with the paused video. "Is that from today? Did you record the bear?" Before anyone could answer, a strange sound came from outside, a low, rumbling growl that made everyone freeze. Noah stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. Ranger Walsh moved swiftly to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer outside into the gathering darkness. His body tensed. "Everyone stay inside," he said quietly, letting the curtain fall back into place. "It seems your bear has followed you home." A collective gasp filled the cabin. Olivia immediately rushed to Noah's portable crib, scooping him up despite him being sound asleep. The baby whimpered at the sudden movement but settled back against his mother's shoulder. "That's impossible," Daniel whispered, moving toward the window. "We drove 20 miles from the picnic site. Bears don't track humans like that." Ranger Walsh placed a restraining hand on Daniel's arm. "Please, stay away from the windows. And you'd be surprised what bears are capable of, especially if they've begun associating humans with food." The second ranger, a younger woman whose nameplate read Torres, was already on her radio, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. "Possible Code 12 at Pete Sanderson's cabin, half-mile east of the North Ridge Trail entrance. Bear on premises, civilians inside. Requesting backup and tranq team." Pete's weathered face had gone pale. "This isn't normal behavior," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "Not for a brown bear, not in this region." Outside, another low growl rumbled through the gathering darkness. It sounded closer this time. "Is there a back way out of this cabin?" Ranger Walsh asked Pete, his hand resting on the tranquilizer gun holstered at his hip. Pete nodded. "Through the kitchen, there's a door that leads to a small deck. From there, it's about 30 yards to the access road where your vehicles are parked." "Good." Walsh turned to Torres. "As soon as backup arrives, we'll evacuate the family. Until then, everyone stays put and stays quiet." Rose sat frozen, her phone still in her hand, the paused image of Noah touching the bear's paw glowing on the screen. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Bears didn't track people over miles of terrain. They didn't follow cars. This wasn't natural behavior. Unless... "It's because of Noah," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. All eyes turned to her. "What did you say, Mom?" Olivia asked, clutching her sleeping son tighter. Rose looked up, meeting the confused gazes of her family. "I think it's because of Noah. The bear connected with him somehow. You all saw it in the video. That moment when Noah touched its paw, something happened, something different." Ranger Torres stopped her radio communication, giving Rose a skeptical look. "Ma'am, bears don't form instant connections with humans, especially not with babies. This animal is likely just hungry and has followed the scent of your picnic supplies. Did you bring any food from the picnic site to this cabin?" Daniel nodded. "Of course. We packed everything up in a hurry. Our cooler's in the trunk of our car, and we brought some leftovers inside." Walsh moved to the cabin's small kitchen area and grimaced when he saw the remains of sandwiches and fruit on the counter. "That's your answer right there. The bear caught the scent. We need to secure this food immediately." As the Rangers worked to gather the food items into sealed containers, Rose couldn't shake the certainty that had come over her. She rewound the video on her phone, watching again the moment when Noah and the bear made contact. There was something in the animal's eyes, a flash of... what? Recognition? Intelligence? Whatever it was, it didn't align with everything she'd been taught about wild animals. A sharp crack from outside startled everyone, the sound of breaking wood. "It's on the porch," Walsh said, drawing his tranquilizer gun. Everyone moved to the back of the cabin, now. Daniel helped Pete, who was struggling with his arthritic knees, while Mia gathered their belongings. Olivia held Noah close, her face a mask of terror. Rose found herself unable to move, still transfixed by the video on her phone. Another crack, louder this time, followed by the sound of claws scratching against the wooden door. "It's trying to get in," Torres whispered, her own tranquilizer gun now drawn. "This is highly unusual behavior." Noah stirred in Olivia's arms, rubbing his eyes groggily. He blinked awake, looking around the unfamiliar surroundings in confusion. Then, hearing the scratching at the door, his face lit up with recognition, and he let out a happy babble, pointing toward the sound. "Bah! Bah!" he exclaimed, the closest he could come to saying bear with his limited vocabulary. The scratching at the door immediately stopped. Everyone held their breath. Noah called out again, louder this time. "Bay, B!" exclamation mark. A softer sound came from outside, not a growl, but almost a whimper. Walsh and Torres exchanged baffled looks. This was clearly beyond their training. "What's happening?" Olivia whispered, looking down at her son in confusion and fear. Pete, leaning heavily on his walking stick, moved slowly back toward the front of the cabin. "I've seen a lot of strange things in my 30 years in these woods," he said quietly, "but nothing like this. That bear is responding to your boy." Before anyone could stop him, the old forester approached the window nearest the door and carefully peered out through a gap in the curtains. The others waited in tense silence for his report. "Well, I'll be damned," Pete finally said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's just sitting there on the porch, like a dog waiting to be let in." Walsh moved to Pete's side, looking out through the same gap. His professional composure faltered for a moment as he witnessed the scene. The large brown bear was indeed sitting calmly on the porch. Its massive body settled back on its haunches, eyes fixed on the cabin door. "This is unprecedented," the ranger murmured, "in all my years of wildlife management." A sudden idea, crazy, reckless, but somehow compelling, formed in Rose's mind. She looked down at her phone, at the video she'd captured, then at her grandson, who was now squirming in Olivia's arms, still calling out for the bear. "Let me try something," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mom, no," Olivia protested, but Rose was already moving forward, pushing past Walsh to stand directly in front of the cabin door. "Mrs. Marshall, step back immediately," Torres ordered, raising her tranquilizer gun. Rose ignored her, pulling up the video on her phone and turning the volume to maximum. With trembling fingers, she pressed play. The sounds of the picnic site filled the cabin, birds chirping, the rustling of the trees, Noah's delighted babbling as he encountered the bear. Outside, the bear made a strange huffing sound. Rose advanced the video to the moment when Noah touched the bear's paw, and the animal's confused reaction played through the speakers. Noah, hearing his own voice, renewed his excited calls from Olivia's arms. "This is insane," Daniel hissed, torn between pulling his mother-in-law away from the door and trusting that she somehow knew what she was doing. But Rose wasn't finished. On an impulse that she couldn't explain later, she unlocked her phone and pulled up the camera app, switching to video mode. Then, before anyone could stop her, she opened the cabin door a crack, just enough to extend her arm and point the camera outside. "Mrs. Marshall!" Walsh shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. The bear's massive face appeared in the narrow opening, its hot breath fogging the phone screen as it sniffed curiously at the device. Rose's hand was inches from powerful jaws that could sever her arm in a single bite. Yet fear had mysteriously abandoned her. "Look, Noah," she said softly, turning so her grandson could see the screen of her phone, which now displayed a live image of the bear's face. "Your friend came to say hello." Noah squealed in delight, reaching toward the phone. The bear, hearing the baby's voice, made a soft grunting sound that was almost gentle. Slowly, carefully, Rose pulled her arm back inside and closed the door. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, but a strange calm had settled over her mind. "That was the most reckless thing I've ever witnessed," Walsh said, his professional demeanor cracking. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" Rose nodded, looking down at her phone, where the bear's curious face was now frozen on the screen. "Yes, I do. But I also know what I saw today. This isn't an ordinary bear, and this isn't an ordinary situation." A sudden commotion outside announced the arrival of backup. The sound of vehicles pulling up, doors slamming, and voices calling out. The bear would soon be tranquilized and relocated, its unusual behavior documented in some government report and eventually forgotten. But Rose knew that what had happened between Noah and the bear wouldn't be forgotten. Not by her family, and perhaps not by the bear itself. She looked at the two videos on her phone, the original encounter at the picnic, and now this new, even more inexplicable interaction at the cabin. "Mom," Olivia said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Noah had calmed down and was once again drowsy in his mother's arms. "What are you thinking?" Rose met her daughter's eyes. "I'm thinking that something extraordinary happened today. Something that people might need to see." "You can't be serious," Olivia said, her voice rising slightly. "You want to share these videos, to show the world how close my baby came to being mauled by a wild animal." "But he wasn't mauled," Rose pointed out gently. "That's what makes this so remarkable. That bear had every opportunity, every natural instinct telling it to attack, but it didn't. It connected with Noah somehow. Don't you want to understand why?" Before Olivia could answer, the cabin door burst open as 4 additional park rangers entered, their faces grim and determined. "We've tranquilized the bear," one of them announced. "It'll be transported deeper into the conservation area, away from hiking trails and campgrounds." "Is everyone all right in here?" another asked, scanning the room for signs of injury or distress. Walsh nodded, holstering his unused tranquilizer gun. "No physical injuries, but I'd recommend someone check these folks for shock. They've had quite an ordeal." As the Rangers began organizing the family's evacuation from the cabin, they would be taken to the park headquarters for debriefing and medical evaluation. Rose found herself pulled aside by Ranger Torres. "Ma'am, I couldn't help noticing you were recording when you opened the door," the young ranger said quietly, glancing around to ensure none of her colleagues were within earshot. "I should confiscate that footage as part of our incident report." Rose clutched her phone tighter. "Is that really necessary?" Torres hesitated, then lowered her voice further. "Officially, yes, but I've been studying bear behavior for my graduate thesis. What I saw tonight doesn't align with anything in the scientific literature. If you were willing to share that footage with me, unofficially, it could be invaluable to my research." Rose studied the young woman's face, recognizing a genuine scientific curiosity that mirrored her own need to understand what had happened. "I'll make you a copy," she agreed, "but I'm keeping the original." Torres nodded gratefully. "Thank you, and perhaps we could stay in touch, if anything else unusual happens." Rose thought about Noah's clear recognition of the bear, his excitement at its presence rather than fear. Something told her this story wasn't over yet. "I think that would be wise," she said quietly. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of official statements, medical examinations, and repeated tellings of their extraordinary encounter. By unspoken family agreement, they downplayed the moment when Noah had touched the bear and made no mention of Rose's reckless door opening at the cabin. To the authorities, it was simply an unusual bear encounter with a fortunate outcome. Nothing more. But as they finally returned to their homes in the nearby town of Pine Haven, Rose couldn't stop watching the 2 videos she'd captured. There was something in the bear's eyes, something in Noah's fearless response that haunted her. It felt like witnessing a conversation in a language she couldn't quite understand. 3 days later, Olivia called in a panic. "Mom, you need to come over right now," she said, her voice tight with stress. "What's wrong? Is Noah okay?" Rose asked, already reaching for her car keys. "He's fine, but just come quickly and bring your phone with those videos." 20 minutes later, Rose stood in her daughter's backyard, staring in disbelief at the scene before her. Noah was playing happily in his sandbox, supervised by a white-faced Daniel who stood nearby with a baseball bat gripped tightly in his hands. And at the very back of the yard, sitting calmly just beyond the fence line where the yard met the wooded area behind the housing development, was a brown bear. The same brown bear. "It showed up an hour ago," Daniel said, his voice low and strained. "Just sat there watching." Noah spotted it and went crazy with excitement. "He keeps trying to crawl to the fence. We've called animal control, but they're delayed on another call." Rose slowly raised her phone and began to record. The bear's ears perked up at the sight of the device, as if it recognized what Rose was doing. "This is impossible," Olivia whispered, standing in the doorway of the house. "We're 15 miles from Pete's cabin, which was already 20 miles from the picnic site. And didn't the rangers say they were relocating it deep into the conservation area? That's at least 50 miles from here." Rose zoomed in on the bear's face. There was no doubt it was the same animal. Somehow, against all logic and natural bear behavior, it had tracked them to their home. "We need to send these videos to Ranger Torres," Rose said, still filming. "This goes beyond unusual behavior. This bear is deliberately seeking out Noah." "But why?" Daniel asked, shifting his grip on the baseball bat. "What does it want with our son?" Before Rose could answer, Noah let out a particularly excited squeal and threw a plastic toy in the bear's direction. It fell far short of the fence, but the bear's reaction was immediate. It stood up on all fours, its attention fully focused on the baby. Daniel raised the bat higher, moving to place himself between the bear and his son, but Rose put a restraining hand on his arm. "Wait," she said softly. "Just watch." The bear lowered its head, then did something that made all 3 adults freeze in astonishment. It pawed at the ground twice, then sat back on its haunches and repeated the movement. Exactly the same gesture that Noah had made when he offered the apple at the picnic. Noah clapped his hands in delight and mimicked the movement back, patting the sand in front of him twice before raising his arms. "It's communicating with him," Olivia breathed, her fear momentarily overcome by wonder. The bear continued to sit calmly beyond the fence, making no attempt to come closer. Its eyes remained fixed on Noah, who was now happily showing off his toys, holding each one up as if for the bear's approval. "I'm calling Ranger Torres," Rose said, pulling out her phone. "This isn't just unusual behavior anymore. This is something else entirely." Within an hour, the ranger arrived, accompanied by a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Elaine Myers, a wildlife biologist specializing in bear cognition from the State University. They observed the scene from inside the house, watching through the window as Noah continued his strange, one-sided interaction with the bear, which had not moved from its position beyond the fence. In 30 years of studying bears, I've never seen anything like this, Dr. Myers murmured, making notes on a tablet. This completely contradicts our understanding of wild bear behavior. Could it be an escaped performing bear? Daniel suggested. Something from a circus or a private collection? Dr. Myers shook her head. No collar, no tags, and its behavior doesn't suggest prior domestication. This is definitely a wild bear, and yet... She gestured toward the window where the bear was now mimicking Noah's movements again, raising its paw when the baby raised his hand. It's like they're playing a game, Olivia said, her voice filled with confused wonder. How is this possible? I have a theory, Dr. Myers said slowly, but it's so far outside the current scientific consensus that I hesitate to even suggest it. All eyes turned to her expectantly. There have been isolated reports, mostly anecdotal and largely dismissed by the scientific community, of certain individuals, often children, forming unusual connections with wild animals. Most of these accounts are written off as exaggeration or misinterpretation of normal animal behavior. She paused, watching as Noah giggled at something the bear did. But I've always wondered if there might be something more to these stories, some rare human quality that certain animals can sense and respond to. Like a modern-day Dr. Dolittle? Daniel asked skeptically. Dr. Myers smiled slightly. Nothing so dramatic as actually talking with animals. More like an unusual level of empathy or connection that transcends the usual species barriers. In most cases, the scientific community has dismissed these accounts because they've never been properly documented. She turned to Rose. Until now. Your videos, particularly the moment when your grandson touched the bear, could be the first solid evidence of this phenomenon. Rose felt a chill run down her spine, remembering how she had felt compelled to keep filming even when every instinct should have been screaming at her to help her grandson. What are you suggesting exactly? I'd like your permission to share these videos with a small group of colleagues, experts in animal cognition, child development, and interspecies communication. This could be groundbreaking research. Olivia shook her head immediately. Absolutely not. I don't want Noah becoming some kind of scientific curiosity. And what about his safety? This bear has followed us across miles of terrain to find him. What if it becomes aggressive next time? That's precisely why this deserves scientific study, Dr. Myers argued gently. Understanding what's happening here could protect Noah and potentially provide incredible insights into animal cognition. I promise the research would be conducted with the utmost discretion and respect for your family's privacy. As the adults debated outside the strange connection between baby and bear continued to unfold, witnessed only by Rose's camera recording silently on the windowsill. What none of them realized was that this debate about privacy and scientific research would soon be rendered moot. Because Mia, who had been quietly observing everything while visiting her brother's family, had already taken matters into her own hands. Fascinated by what she had witnessed at the picnic and convinced that the world needed to see this extraordinary connection, she had copied the original video from Rose's phone while everyone was distracted at Pete's cabin, and 12 hours earlier, thinking she was doing something important for science and human-animal understanding, she had uploaded it to her social media accounts with the simple caption, "Miracle in Pinewood Park, Baby and Bear Connection." The video was already approaching 1 million views. By morning, the Marshall family's world had completely changed. News vans lined their quiet suburban street, reporters shouted questions whenever anyone appeared near a window, and their phones rang constantly with calls from television producers, journalists, and wildlife organizations. "How could you, Mia?" Olivia cried when the truth came out. They were huddled in the living room, curtains drawn against the media circus outside. We agreed to keep this private. Mia's face was pale but determined. People need to see this, Liv. This isn't just about Noah anymore. This is about changing how we understand animals, how we coexist with them. Don't you see how important this is? More important than my son's safety, his privacy? Olivia's voice cracked with emotion. He's a baby, Mia, a baby, and now he's all over the internet with a wild bear. Daniel paced the living room, periodically checking the window where police officers were now keeping the media at a safe distance. The comments are getting ugly, he reported grimly, scrolling through his phone. Half the internet thinks we endangered Noah for views. The other half thinks the video is fake or the bear is trained. Meanwhile, in the nursery, Rose sat watching Noah play with his toys, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around him. The bear had disappeared just before dawn, melting back into the forest behind their home, but Rose had no doubt it would return. The connection between the animal and her grandson was unlike anything she could explain, a bond that defied natural law and human understanding. Dr. Myers had stayed overnight, setting up monitoring equipment along the fence line. Now she entered the nursery, her face grave. "The wildlife authorities are mobilizing," she said quietly. "They've classified the bear as a dangerous animal due to its unusual fixation on human habitation. Standard protocol in these cases is to capture and euthanize." Rose felt her heart constrict. They can't do that. This bear hasn't shown any aggression. It's followed a human family across miles of terrain, approaching a residential home with a child present. By definition, that makes it a danger. Dr. Myers sighed heavily. "I've been arguing on your behalf, explaining the research potential, but they're concerned about liability. If they don't act and something happens." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Ranger Torres entered, still in uniform but looking exhausted. "We've got a situation," she said without preamble. "The bear has been spotted in the park 2 blocks from here. There's a school group on a nature walk in the area." Rose felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. They're going to kill it, aren't they? Torres couldn't meet her eyes. The Trank team has orders to take the shot if they get a clear line. I thought you should know." Noah, who had been quietly playing with blocks, suddenly looked up at the window, his face lighting up with recognition. "Bah!" he called out, climbing to his feet and toddling to the glass. All 3 women turned to look. There, visible just beyond the yard, was the bear, standing at the edge of the tree line, watching the house. "It's back, Doctor," Myers whispered, reaching for her radio to alert her research team. Rose made a split-second decision. "Ranger Torres, how quickly can you get me to that park?" "What? Why would you?" "Because if that bear is heading toward a group of schoolchildren, there's only one thing that might stop it." Rose gently lifted Noah, who squirmed happily in her arms. "The bear isn't a threat to Noah. It's connected to him somehow. If we can use that connection to lead it away from people, back toward the wilderness, that's incredibly dangerous," Dr. Myers protested. "You can't use a baby as bait for a wild animal." "I'm not suggesting using him as bait," Rose countered. "I'm suggesting we trust what we've all witnessed. This bear responds to Noah in ways that defy explanation. It recognizes him, it communicates with him. If Noah can somehow signal the bear to return to the wild..." Torres looked conflicted. "This goes against every protocol we have. And what we've been witnessing goes against every bit of scientific understanding about wild bear behavior," Rose replied. "Sometimes when the impossible happens, we need to respond in kind." Before any decision could be made, the distant crack of a rifle shot echoed from the direction of the park. Noah startled at the sound, his lower lip trembling. "They've taken the shot," Torres said grimly, reaching for her radio. "Control, this is Ranger Torres. Status report on the bear situation. Over." The radio crackled. "Torres, we have a problem. Tranq shot was fired but missed. Bear is on the move, heading directly toward Oak Street Elementary's nature path. Tactical team is repositioning, but we're looking at least 10 minutes before they can intercept." Rose looked at Dr. Myers and Ranger Torres, resolve hardening in her eyes. "There's no time to argue. Either help me or stay out of my way." When Olivia and Daniel realized what Rose was planning, their reactions were predictably explosive. "Have you lost your mind?" Daniel shouted. "You want to take our son to the bear?" "Not to the bear," Rose explained hurriedly as she gathered Noah's favorite toys. "Just to the edge of the park, where Noah might be able to call to it, to draw it away from those children." "This is insanity," Olivia sobbed, clutching Noah to her chest protectively. "I won't allow it." It was Mia who unexpectedly became Rose's ally. "Liv, you've seen how the bear responds to Noah. It's gentle with him. It recognizes him. If there's even a chance this could prevent a tragedy, the tragedy I'm concerned about is my son being mauled by a wild animal," Olivia cried. But time was running out. The radio reports grew increasingly urgent. The bear was moving directly toward the school group, and the tactical team was still minutes away. In the end, it was Noah himself who resolved the impasse. Hearing the distress in the adults' voices, he began to fuss and cry, reaching out toward the window where he had last seen the bear. "Bah!" he wailed, tears streaming down his chubby cheeks. "B.A.!" Something in his desperation reached Olivia. She looked down at her son, then at Rose, then out the window toward the park where dozens of children might be in danger. "If anything seems wrong, we bring him straight back," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "And Daniel and I are coming too." With Torres driving and Dr. Myers making hurried calls to coordinate with the park rangers, the Marshall family raced toward the small nature reserve. News crews, noticing their departure, followed at a distance, cameras at the ready. They pulled into the park entrance just as panicked shouts could be heard from the nature trail. Parents who had been chaperoning the school group were rushing children toward the parking lot, faces pale with fear. "The bear is on the main trail," Torres reported, receiving updates through her radio. "Tactical team is still 3 minutes out." Rose looked at her family, gathered tensely in the ranger's vehicle. Now or never. With Noah securely in Olivia's arms and Daniel hovering protectively beside them, they made their way to a small clearing that overlooked the main trail. Rose had her phone out, recording everything, partly as documentation for the authorities, partly because some instinct told her this moment needed to be preserved. And then they saw it. The bear, moving steadily along the path, following what appeared to be the lingering scent of the school group. It was 60 yards away and closing the distance rapidly. "Now, Noah," Rose whispered, "call to your friend." Olivia lifted Noah higher, and the baby, spotting the familiar shape of the bear, let out a delighted squeal. "Bay! B-A!" exclamation mark. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The bear stopped in its tracks, nose lifting to sniff the air.